Participants, it gives me great pleasure here from Emerge Africa to welcome to this presentation by Antoinette Mukendwa. Antoinette is from Polytechnic of Namibia, and she'll be speaking about e-learning maturity models and the use of these in higher education, and also as a part of the transformation that her institution is currently in, while it's transforming into Namibia University of Science and Technology. Antoinette will speak for about half an hour, and then we will open up for discussions and questions. I won't say much more further. I will just leave the floor to you, Antoinette. You may go ahead with your presentation.
Hi, thank you so very much, Jacob, for that introduction. I hope that everyone can hear me, and maybe you can indicate in the chat if it's fine, because my biggest problem and my issue is that I speak very, very fast. So even more so when I'm excited or nervous, which I'm actually both right now. So if I speak too fast, please slow me down, but I see that everyone's saying it's all good. So I'm going to start with my presentation. I am very, very excited to be here. This is something new for me, something I've always wanted to do. Since I am in the e-learning world, I think it's only a matter of time before you interact with your peers in a group like this. But anyway, like Jacob so kindly introduced, my name is Antoinette, and I am based in the very wonderful and sunny city of Windhoek, Namibia. I wonder how many of you have been here. It's really quite beautiful, and I'd encourage it. Please come by and visit, just so you can experience it yourself. It's quite a warm day. We're still in winter, but it doesn't feel like it. Okay. So getting into my presentation, I'm going to I'm going to sort of give you a background of why the e-learning maturity model and sort of how I got where I am today. I asked a question there on my slide that says, a framework to enhance the systematic implementation of e-learning policies. And this is a question I asked myself because at the Polytechnic of Namibia, we're currently revising our e-learning policy, and we did not want to miss any crucial aspects. So we needed something to guide us. So, and this is something I literally stumbled across when I was sort of doing my research, and I found it to be quite helpful and useful. So really, this is sort of the background of where I got into the e-learning maturity model. And I hope you will all learn something and you can actually apply it in your institutions as well. Now, I also need to add that this is also just a pilot. It was an exploratory study. So this is not a full-blown project as yet at the Polytechnic. I just sort of chose for the center that I work for to actually pilot it for that specific center. But it has not gone full-wide into the institution, just so you are clear about that. Okay, so without further ado, I'm just going to get into my presentation. The institution that I work for is, and I'm very, very excited to share this with all of you, is transforming into a university of science and technology. And so we will no longer be a polytechnic, but a university. This is actually more for funding purposes. But through this whole transformation process, a lot of questions have sort of come up. And one of the questions that have come up is in terms of looking at the integration and the implementation of e-learning into the institution's key activities. Because we're becoming a University of Science and Technology, we need to ensure that we're actually integrating e-learning seamlessly in all our different activities. And really, I think when I did my research, I found that most or many institutions that I looked at are not asking the question whether you should not be implementing e-learning. That's not the question anymore. The debate in literature is actually how far along are you in this process? Are you actually maturing to get to the vision that you had for e-learning? And that's sort of the type of that I'm asking. Right, so I have a problem statement, and that this is that e-learning was implemented as a fourth mode of learning at the Polytechnic of Namibia in 2010 already. In the same year, we actually developed an e-learning policy which was put into place. But our vision was actually to at some point have a fully fledged online course online. So 5 years on, unfortunately, we have not met this vision, this goal, whatever you want to call it. We haven't met it. And the question is, why? You know, are we actually sort of working towards that still? And this is sort of the problem that I gauged at the situation. So the aim of my research and the study that I did was really just to evaluate whether the Polytechnic of Namibia is e-learning capable, and I'll sort of explain what that means. And I used Marshall's 2007 e-learning maturity model. And the nice thing about this model, it's actually a methodology as well. So it essentially tells you the steps to go about doing this. And I also wanted to explore the ways in which the maturity model can actually assist not only in improving standards, but the quality of e-learning activities at the Polytechnic of Namibia. So I really wanted it to sort of assist us in terms of refining and revising our e-learning policy, and in that way improve standards and quality of e-learning. All right. Before we get into the meatier sections of my presentation, I sort of just want us to be on the same page in terms of what do we believe a maturity model is. So I came up with my own definition. I would have loved to hear what you think it is, but in the absence of some interaction during this discussion, this is sort of what I came up with. So I looked at different definitions in literature in terms of what maturity is, and this is sort of what I thought encompassed everything I was trying to accomplish. So a maturity model really is just an instrument that helps you as an institution to rate and determine the evolutionary progression. So that means that you have to be growing from a point A to a point Z of an institution's capabilities. So you look at the following activities: to design, to plan, to initiate, manage, and evaluate all the e-learning activities. And now this is the important part, with the sole aim of being used as a framework to guide improvement in all spheres of e-learning. So quite a very comprehensive answer, but this is pretty much what I want a maturity model to be able to do. And this is the definition that I came up with. On the other hand, you'll hear me talk a lot about e-learning maturity and also e-learning capability. But what's the difference? So I just want to look at the difference before we go into the e-learning maturity model. What it means to be e-learning capable, and this is a definition. Sorry, I see I didn't actually reference this. This is also from Marshall 2007, and he came up with a definition of what capability means. He says that this is, in the context of the e-learning maturity model, it refers to the ability of an institution to ensure that the e-learning design, development, and deployment is meeting the needs of the students, staff, and institution. So capability includes the ability of an institution to sustain e-learning support of teaching as the demand grows and staff changes. Now the idea with e-learning is that it's supposed to evolve and grow. You're not supposed to stay stagnant. If you're not growing, you're not maturing. So really, when we look at capability, it's sort of telling you, are we sort of meeting the needs that we set out to meet? Are we actually supporting our students and staff and institutions? So do you have all the resources in place to actually ensure that you can actually run your e-learning activities? So that's the difference in terms of capability. All right, so now that we know sort of the difference or the definitions in terms of maturity and capability, I want us to go into the e-learning maturity model. I am not too sure if some of you have already worked with it or this is the first time, but for the sake of the first timers working with the e-learning maturity model, I'll explain in as brief as possible exactly how it works. It's honestly, it sounds a lot more complex than it is when you actually work with the model. So I'll start with a brief background of the e-learning maturity model. So as you see there, it was basically established from two other models, and all of these models come from the software engineering world. So it's a capability maturity model and the software process improvement and capability determination. Right. Now, when I actually started doing my research, the first version I worked with was in 2002, and the current version is version 2.3 2007. So it has evolved quite tremendously. I mean, it's almost night and day if you see the two models next to one another. So they've done a lot of research, and honestly, it has just improved with each version. All right, now if I go into the actual maturity model itself, it's divided into three major components, which I'll explain briefly. But the first component, it is called the process area. So there are 5 of them. And the 5 process areas are further broken down into 35 processes. So I'll show you a sort of illustration just to show you how it looks like. The second component are what we call the dimensions. So it also has 5 process dimensions, and then those dimensions are further broken down into what are called practices. Once again, I'll show you an illustration. And the practices, you'll see some are in bold and some are not in bold. So the ones in bold are essential, whereas the ones in plain text, although they are useful, they don't actually, they're not the essential one. So basically, they're supporting the essential practices. All right, so the last component of an e-learning maturity model is what we call the capability assessments. And once again, when I show you an illustration, this will become much clearer, because right now I'm just sort of gibbering some words at you. All right, so this is the first component I talked about. These are the processes. So you can see there are 5 processes. The first one is learning. Second is development. Then we have support, evaluation, and organization. So each of those processes, so it even gives you a description of what each actually entails, is further broken down into the process areas that you see underneath it. So all in all, there are 35 processes that you need to actually evaluate within the institution. So when you use the eMM, you basically, for example, L1, learning objectives guide the design and implementation of courses. So then you'll be looking at that specific process. Are we actually doing it adequately or not? So this process is sort of guide in terms of what activities you'll be looking at when you use the eMM. The second component I talked about was the dimensions and the practices. And you'll see there are also 5 dimensions, and the dimensions are further broken down into the practices. Dimension 1 is the delivery, we have the planning, with the definition, management, and the last one is the optimization. Now, the mistake that's usually made when you look at the dimension, it almost looks like it's a hierarchy, you know, whereas dimension 1 would sort of be like the level 1, and then dimension 5 would be level 5, but that's not necessarily the case. The way the eMM works is that for you to sort of be at optimization, you need to have delivered, planned, done all the definitions and management properly before your optimization level. So basically saying that you need the support of all the dimensions below it. So it really works that the others are support for the ultimate optimization, because that's actually what we want to do for our e-learning activities. We don't just want to deliver it, but at the end of the day, once we've delivered it, where are we working towards? You know, we want to optimize the type of delivery that we have. So you need to sort of think of it that way, that these are not hierarchical at all, but it's sort of just a progression. You know, it's progression until you sort of get to the ultimate, whatever that is. Right, and then last but not least, these are the third component of the eMM, and that is the capability assessment. Now the capability assessment, this just basically, and this is sort of the easy part of explaining, just this is what you use to rate. So for each of the processes that we have there, you would rate yourself as an institution. And you would basically use this key where fully adequate, and it's also color coordinated. This basically tells you that this is currently being done clearly and is sustainably addressed at your institution. And obviously at the end of that would be it's not adequate at all. That's shown in the white. So basically this rating indicates that there's currently no evidence of the practice occurring in the institutional context. So pretty much what you're doing, you are rating yourself using these sort of 4. Is it adequate? Is it fully adequate, largely, partially, or not at all adequate? So you look at the different processes at your institution and you determine which one of those actually, is it adequate or not, and what you need to work on. Right, so now that you know more or less how it works, I'll come back to this when I show you my methodology. I just want to sort of share with you how the eMM has been used in other institutions. In the research that I did, I found that it has been used in over 80 different institutions, mostly in Australia, because obviously it was developed in Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and Japan. I think there are some institutions in the US as well who've actually used the eMM. And the eMM capability assessments are meant to be comparative capability visualization. So I'll show you my results, and you'll see that the idea is for you to look at it, and already you can sort of see, gauging by the colors and the capability assessment, so it's quite clear to see what you need to work on, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses. So it's supposed to also guide and focus any of your continuous improvement and attaining your goals. Like I said earlier, you sort of have this vision to attain. So the question is, are you actually attaining it? So you can sort of use the eMM to help you gauge that. And then last but not least, and this is actually the most important, and this is why I'm so glad to be sharing this with you, is that the eMM is meant to be sort of a benchmarking. So the idea is that I would sort of determine maturity at my institution. Kola Wole, I hope I said your name right, would do it at his institution, so would Oni, so would Nicola, and so forth. So the idea is we'd actually now benchmark with one another. So I would look at my results and be like, okay, we actually need assistance in this area. I see that Kola Wole's institution is actually doing very well in that, so let's find out what they're doing, and so we can learn from one another in that way. So really the eMM is supposed to be for benchmarking purposes, and it's a capability maturity model with those observational e-learning quality frameworks in order to create a quality framework for improving e-learning maturity. So whatever you identify as a weakness, you don't just want to sit there and not do anything about it. You're supposed to now sort of work with your peers and collaborate, and then sort of, assist each other where possible, especially if you are strong where we are weak. So that's the idea of the eMM. All right, so now let's get to the nitty-gritties, and this is sort of the methodology that I was talking about. I will not pretend to say that I actually came up with all this. This is all. If you go onto the website for the eMM, you'll find quite comprehensive documentation, and it tells you exactly the type of document you need to look at. So it's a very, very nice guide. When you start working with it, it overwhelms you because there's so many documents. There's actually, I think, a 200-page document that you need to read. When you see that, it sort of scares you a little bit, but don't be. It's quite easy when you start working with it. So it really tells you what questions you need to look at, the potential documents which can be examined to determine your institution's capability level. So the type of ones that I looked at my institution, especially because we are revising our e-learning policy, I looked at institutional policies, our current e-learning policy, as well as our e-learning strategic plan. And so the documents in the strategic plans, those are the type of documents that I looked to inform when I was actually doing the capability assessment. I used 4 assessors to complete the assessment workbook. I will show you the assessment workbook right now for triangulation purposes, obviously, just to ensure that it's going to be valid, because it can become quite subjective, so you want more people involved in this process. So I really suggest that you do it with a couple of people, if you can have more than 4 people. So what happened is I had each person complete an assessment workbook, and then I consolidated it into one workbook by averaging out all the assessment capabilities. This is essentially how the assessment workbook looks like. I don't know if you can see the writing, it's quite tiny, but the concept is there. So what you get is one big Excel sheet document, and you'll see at the bottom there, it says your summary, L1, L2, so basically from L1 all the way to 09. Those are all your process areas that I showed you earlier. So for each tab that you go into, you are actually going to be looking at using the dimensions and the practices. So you see the dimensions there, you have delivery, planning, definition, and then it continues with optimization and management. So the idea is for each specific process area, you're actually going to be determining the rating, and the rating is as easy as just clicking on the drop down. I don't know if you can see the drop down there. So you click on the drop down, and then it gives you the capability assessment. So now you choose, is it not adequate, is it partially, is it largely, or is it fully adequate? So you just choose there. And once you've completed this, you go into the summary tab, and everything is sort of put onto that one page. So it's very clear to see. So it's really quite easy to work with. All right, before I show you my results, I just want to share some limitations. Like I said, this is just a pilot project that I did at my institution. And so not all stakeholders were involved. At my institution, it works a little bit different. That e-learning is sort of falling under different sections. So I just work specifically within my center, obviously, just to sort of pilot it and explore the use of this. So that is actually a limitation in that it doesn't speak for the whole institution. And another limitation is that not all assessors completed all the section of the assessment workbook because it was obviously sometimes beyond their scope. So depending who I asked, because I asked some administrators, I asked librarians to also come through. So depending on what they did, they could answer to that specific part. All right, so this is what you get on your summary tab. So once you've sort of computed everything, this is what you get in your summary tab. And this is actually for the learning process category. So you see that it honestly just shows you visually already. The black indicates fully adequate. So you can already see what at the poly, or rather at the center that I work for, what is fully adequate, what is largely, and that is the dark blue. What is partial is the light blue. I hope you can see the colors. I'm assuming you can. And the white is what is not adequate. So by just looking at this, you can already tell what aspects we need to work on already. You can see as well that our delivery is doing very well because we have quite a number of largely adequate and a few fully adequate. But as you go further on to the different dimensions, by the time you get to management, see that management one, it's partially and not adequate. So that's something that we need to work on. So obviously you need to go into the nitty-gritties and look exactly at the process area that needs assistance or needs some work. Whatever you need to sort of gear your resources to ensure that it's actually improving. So this is sort of how you would use the eMM. This is now the results that I got for the development process category. So you can see that D1, D2 are doing fairly well in terms of delivery to definition, but once again, in terms of management optimization, just a lot needs to be done in that regard. So same thing with D6 and D7. So I'm not going to read it, otherwise we'll never finish. So, but clear to see exactly what we need to work in. All right, I think, if I'm not mistaken, support process category, this is one category that we as the Center for Open and Lifelong Learning at the Polytechnic of Namibia, we're doing quite well. As you see, there are quite a lot of fully adequate, because there's a lot of black. So you can already see that, okay, you know what, these areas, we're very strong. There's some pockets of excellence here. So this is sort of how you can gauge to see, this is definitely going well. Let's strengthen that. And then you can sort of look at the aspects that are not working. But once again, you'll see that as you get to management and optimization, it sort of starts to dwindle down, and it's partially or not adequate at all. The organization process category, you'll see the 01 to 06 about there. Those are areas that we really need to sort of be looking at because they're only partially or not adequate. So those areas we really need improvement in. All right, and then the last category is the evaluation process category. By now, you should know more or less. You can gauge by looking at the illustration in front of you, sort of how we're doing at the Polytechnic. Right, so my findings, and some of them I shared them with you. I'm not going to read through all of it. These are the strengths that came out. So looking at the summary of what I got from my eMM, this is sort of what the Polytechnic of Namibia in terms of my pilot study is doing very well at. I'm not going to read through them, so I'm just going to go to the next section. This is just basically the weaknesses that I identified. And I really, I'm one person to sort of always try to sort of focus on your weaknesses because you want to strengthen them, of course. But just to sort of catch on one or two of them. There's a general lack of systems in place for further manage and optimize processes. This is something that you also notice by looking at the illustrations that I showed you, that we're doing well for delivery until about definition, but then the management and optimizing it, that part needs to be strengthened. And another one here says staff response time to student communication. That was also identified as a weakness. E-learning courses are not designed to support diverse learning styles. This is something that I work with quite often. I was like, wow, this is something I really want to actually engage with and strengthen. So by just looking at these findings in terms of what I got from the eMM, I am already more enlightened in terms of what I need to work on, especially in regards to e-learning maturity at my institution. So I already know, I can already gauge. But like I said before, the wonderful thing would be to actually work with another institution and see what they are doing, and then learn from that. And so the idea is I've identified this, I'm already working on them, but it's also, the next step would also sort of benchmark with somebody else to learn how they are overcoming such issues. All right, so I see my time is sort of running out, so I just want to conclude. Obviously, the strength that I found using the eMM reflects some sustainable practices in terms of e-learning at the institution. But most of the processes are largely adequate in the first three domains, that was delivery, planning, and definition, and generally not adequate in the management and optimization of these processes. So identifying this is vital for institutions want to maintain that standard, but also share best practices with other institutions, whether regionally or internationally. So with the e-learning policy revision looming, results obtained from the application of this model is essential in informing that process. So this sort of tells you already sort of what my recommendations are in terms of what I got from this eMM. But like I said, this is just a pilot, this is just the start of it. I still want to do sort of a fully fledged project. Now, my recommendations are actually specifically for using the model itself. The hardest thing that I had to do here was sort of to consolidate all the workbooks. So that was a very difficult task because it's a lot of tabs and it took me quite a lot of time. So in the near future, when I have time, I would love to develop a mergeable workbook where you can sort of just put through, I don't know who's very good with working with Excel. I don't know if that's possible, but a mergeable workbook would make your life so much easier. But an easier alternative, if you don't want to sort of do a consolidation of everybody's ideas in different workbooks, I would suggest that you actually have a workshop session where you invite all the stakeholders involved and you complete the same workbook. It'll go by so much faster. So have a nice long work session and go through all the documentation. Have a team building if you prefer as well, because I think this is actually good for everybody to do. And I said, of course, this is just a pilot, so a follow-up still needs to be done, and I would honestly love to, and this is what I want to suggest now, I would love to work with somebody from a different institution so that we can sort of, benchmark with one another's institution. So I really want to do a full-blown project with another institution where we actually benchmark one another. Okay. And those are my references. I don't think that list is comprehensive, but the major ones. All the documents are available, of course, on the website, on the eMM website. There's a project website with all the documentation. Thank you so very much. I have come to the end of my presentation. I hope I have not lost any of you. And I hope what I've shared is useful and you can apply it and we can brainstorm on some ideas. Please, please, please feel free to ask as many questions as you like. If I can, I will, of course, answer them. Okay, so that's done. Thank you very much.
And thank you to you too, Antoinette. We now open up for questions and comments from you, our dear participants. You are welcome to use either the text box, the chat box, or a microphone as well.
Uh-huh. Okay, let me get it.
Yes, I see Kolawole's hand is raised. Kolawola, please go ahead and ask your question or state your comments. I see you have a microphone enabled, so you are welcome to use voice as well if you wish.
Hello? Hello? Okay, are you hearing me? Okay. Nice presentation, but I want to congratulate you for this presentation. Now,
Thank you.
I want to find out, is there any institution maybe around the world that has fully matured as far as e-learning is concerned? Maybe you have an
Okay.
example of an institution that has fully
Yes.
matured using this e-learning maturity model that has fully matured as far as e-learning is concerned, so that maybe we can look at their model or what they have put in place, so that we'll be able to know where we are going and how to get there. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kolawale. That's a valid question. From the research that I did, this is actually what I found in one of Marshall's papers as well, because he's done quite a lot of research in terms of the eMM. He actually did a lot of comparisons with the different institutions that I talked about from the UK, New Zealand, as well as Australia. And he compared them and he put them all into one table. And this table I've actually included as part of my paper as well. So if you can access my paper, you can see the results from that. But to answer your question, the simple answer is no, not fully matured. You will find that some institutions are stronger in one area as opposed to others, but I've yet to see an institution that's completely black. So that basically means for all the different activities, everything is sort of fully adequate. So I haven't seen that yet. I've seen some institutions that have a lot of black. That means that they've matured in a lot of aspects, but there's still some pockets where they could actually improve. So the idea is, and this is where the benchmarking comes in, is that you identify an institution that is strong in your weaknesses and sort of collaborate with them to sort of strengthen that. But to give you a specific name of institution, I'm sorry, but I cannot do that because they didn't disclose the name of the institutions. And so it's actually better if you, when you actually do this exercise, work in collaboration with another institution and then compare your results. That way you can sort of learn from one another. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but no, the simple answer is no. I haven't seen an institution that's completely fully matured, although they are very strong in specific areas.
All right, thank you, Antoinette. I see Brenda's raised the hand, but for Brenda, I think we should take a question from Nicola, who's asking more specifically if the eMM maturity model has anything on lecturers' capabilities and attitudes.
The thing is, I'm trying to remember. I know there is something on lecturers, but not something specific on attitudes per se. I think what I can suggest for Nicola is if you could perhaps look at that workbook. It has different sections for different individuals. There is a section on lecturers as well, but it's specific to something, and I can't quite remember if it was on attitude. Sorry, I cannot answer your question fully. But yes, there is something on lecturers. Just if my memory doesn't serve me wrong, I don't think it actually asks something on their attitudes per se. because I think the idea is to sort of look at what you are currently doing. I don't think it actually looks at I don't know what you'd classify attitudes as, but yeah, it looks at the activities that you are actually doing as opposed to how you think about something, if that makes sense.
All right, thank you. I see Brenda has a question as well. Brenda, do you wish to put it in the chat box or maybe take the microphone? Sorry, Brenda, I see your microphone is on, but you are very faint.
Is this a little better?
Slightly better, maybe you can just speak a bit louder.
Right, thanks very much.
Oh, I can barely hear her, honestly.
Brenda,
I would like to comment.
I think maybe she'll have to in the chat.
yes, sorry,
Oh,
Brenda,
fantastic.
your sound is very faint. So unfortunately, if you put it in the chat, all right. So see, Brenda is typing now.
Could I perhaps already start sort of addressing your question? Yes, exactly that. One of the, I suppose, my objectives when I was actually asking my assessors to complete their workbooks, I wanted them to indicate, and I don't think I mentioned it in my presentation, there's a notes aspect of the workbook. So you can actually put notes in there. I wanted to find out from my assessors whether the eMM, the model itself, is it user-friendly? Is this something that's relevant to us, or is it not? So I used that, how can I call it, that feature of the model to actually find out about the user-friendliness of the document itself. And some of my comments that I got back from my assessors were like, well, we don't actually do this the way it's written on here. And I was like, you know what, maybe this is what we need to do. We need to actually adapt it for our environment. So definitely not all the components that are on the eMM will be applicable to your institution depending on how you run things. So I definitely agree with you that you need to sort of adapt it to your institution first. So if you can work with the model at first and sort of see what components you have and what's relevant, and sort of almost not consider the stuff that's irrelevant, it would be more helpful for you. But the only problem with doing that is if you're going to use it for collaborative purposes, then you sort of have to discuss that with the institution that you want to sort of do the benchmarking collaboration with, so that you don't eliminate aspects that the other institution might be interested in doing. I don't know if you understand me, Brenda, but So yes, I definitely agree that it needs to be adapted. If anything, I would love to, like I said, if I had more time in the world and manufacture more hours, I'd probably adapt to the current eMM. But I would honestly think that is a project that would work well for many institutions. So yeah, I suppose I've already answered your question. Now I'm just thinking of a bigger picture in terms of actually adapting it for an African context actually, or even for a SADC context, or whatever the case is. So yes, if you want to do something like that, I am more than willing to sort of get involved in that type of project.
All right, thank you. I see Kulawole, I hope I pronounced the name correctly, has raised your hand. If you maybe take Kulawole first, and then I see Nicola has a comment question as well. If we take maybe afterwards. Kulawole, please go ahead. Kulawole, you can go ahead with your question, please.
Areas where institution is not doing well, or our center is not doing well, especially in the area of management. I know management is very key when we talk about implementation of any projects or any programs. What are they doing specifically to improve in that specific area where they are not doing well, as shown in the findings, the management and the optimization where the institution is not doing well? What are they doing, or what is a recommendation for the institution so that they will be able to improve in that aspect? Thank you.
Thank you, Kolawole. I'm assuming you're talking about sort of what the center that I work for, are doing, right?
Yes.
All right. Currently, we are trying to do, let me see how I can put this. We're not trying to do too much at one go, because I think the danger lies in sometimes you identify all your weaknesses, then you sort of want to eliminate them as soon as possible by trying to accomplish as much as possible as soon as possible. And that is something that we are not rushing into doing. So we are actually taking the ones that are manageable in terms, especially if it's operational, because myself, I'm the coordinator of educational technology, so I actually work on the ground with e-learning per se. So the strategic sort of weaknesses that we've identified, we actually haven't touched upon those as yet. But in terms of operational issues that we've identified as a weakness, that we've already started changing the way we actually do things. Like, just to give an example, one of the weaknesses that we identified was that students are not receiving enough, they're not getting the feedback from their tutor fast enough. It's just taking too long, and that there's a communication breakdown between the student and the tutor. So something like that, we've actually now put it as part of our contract. So now we actually revised our contract with the tutors that we need a maximum 48 hours a tutor has to respond to a student query. So we've actually put something like that in a contract to almost ensure that our tutors actually stick to that stipulated time, because this is an issue that was identified, that are not getting feedback fast enough. So that's just one example of what we did. And as part of this whole ensuring that our tutors sort of respond to their students in a timely manner, we've also just recently offered online facilitation course just to sort of make tutors aware about the need for feedback. So what we are basically doing, we are putting the tutors in the shoes of a student. You know, I think sometimes the best experience, the best teacher is actually for you to experience it yourself. So we are actually putting those tutors in the role of a student, and now we are the tutors, and we're sort of now obviously teaching them and letting them sort of get their hang of being in an online environment. And through that process, we hope that they can gauge that it's very important that, you know what, because we don't have verbal cues in an online environment, you know, students really need a quick turnaround in terms of when they can get a response from their tutors. And this is something we've already seen that is improving. Tutors have come back and be like, you know what, now I realize why it's so important. I don't have that verbal cue. I don't have somebody encouraging me as often. So if I'm not there as a tutor, that can also demotivate and discourage a student. That's just one example that I'll share with you.
All right, thank you, Antoinette. I see there are two questions or several questions from Nicola and Tony. Firstly, Nicola is asking about the how to measure, if I understand the question correctly, the cultural structure, institutional culture, using this model. She's asking, like, how do you see the usefulness of using the e-learning maturity model for these kinds of understandings?
Okay. This is something that I also addressed in my paper. I did say that the idea of a such a framework or such a model is not to replace whatever you have on the ground. So you obviously still have something in place already. So the idea is when you sort of want to implement something like this, it should complement what you're already doing. And to sort of get back to your question, the eMM certainly does not cater for all the type of questions that you might have, and definitely not the why aspect, because it's almost, I like to think of it as very quantitative. You know, you get the numbers, so it's sort of numbers game. But if you want more now, the why, you know, that will definitely come with something else. So you need to have it complement whatever else you're already having on the ground. So I don't know if I'm actually sort of answering your question, Nicola, but for that reason, please don't use the eMM on its own in its entirety in just that. No, no, no. It's meant to complement whatever you are having. If you can use it to replace something that you already have, you can do that, but it will definitely not gauge all the type of question that you'd want to have. So certainly not the type of why questions you're looking for, and the institutional culture as well. That I definitely don't recall not even seeing on the eMM, so certainly not.
Right, thank you, Antoinette. I see there is another question that disappeared from my screen. Oh, there we go. Tony's asking about, maybe not asking, but more making a comment if the e-learning maturity models would need an enhancement for institutions that mostly teach face-to-face. And I'm just also putting in Nicola's question about how this model will work with collaborating between institutions with very different methodologies and strategies. I wonder what your comment on this.
Okay. I'm very glad to get all these questions, but I should just state there that I would obviously appreciate any further elaborations. If I miss a point, please feel free to sort of add something to what I say in the chat, because I might not sort of answer your questions fully, and you might have a better idea. So please feel free to sort of jump in. Very good question. Sorry, I didn't get who, Jacob. Who did you say asked that question?
Tony's asking on specifically for institutions with face-to-face, and Nicola about what was institutions very different strategies.
Yes, honestly, the ideal would be, and this is sort of my thinking, I might be wrong, but the ideal would be that my institution is a dual mode institution. That comes with its own challenges on top of that. So for us to sort of overcome the type of issues that we might have, it would be preferable, and I'm just using that word preferable, to work with an institution or to collaborate with an institution that's also dual mode, that might have similar issues, that might have similar concerns, or maybe not, because sometimes you can learn from somebody who's in a completely different situation. But personally, I believe that if possible, and I put that in inverted commas, if possible, maybe to benchmark with an institution that's similarly structured. You won't always get exact replicas in terms of how you do things, but as close as possible to what you are doing, so that you can sort of learn how they overcome it in the same type of structurally organized institution. I don't know if you get what I'm saying. So so the idea is really to, when you do the benchmarking, of course it's good to learn from any other type of institution. The type of mode that you're doing, whether it is students which are based on campus or your students are more outside, e-learning delivery, and this is very important, I think we always go to the pedagogy. The pedagogy should be, it's vital. But obviously if you're face-to-face student and you're doing a hybrid, that would be different from a student that doesn't see you at all. So your concerns are going to be slightly different. And for that reason alone, I would suggest that, sort of similarly structured institutions work with one another. But in the absence of having that, I really do believe that we can still learn well from one another, regardless of what type of institution that we are. Yeah.
Thank you, Antoinette. There's still a bit of time left, like about 7 minutes. So I'm wondering if there are more final questions. Of course, we still have our discussion forum where this discussion can continue after this session is over. I'm going to just put the link in. It's a discussion forum on our landing page on our Emerge Africa live sites.
Nicola, just to speak to what you just posted here, now that I can finally do one thing, I'm not really good at multitasking, really, I'm not. Honestly, for the sake of completing the workbook, I involved pretty much all the people you mentioned there. You cannot actually answer this question. It almost comes from a strategic point of view. My director had to get involved. I had to get somebody from the library involved. I had to get people who are actually e-learning practitioners. I had to get administrative people. So basically, everybody involved in terms of ensuring that it is delivered, whether it's from the support standpoint of view or from a strategic point of view, you need all their perspectives. So it's a mix of people, definitely. So I could not have completed or done this research without their input. And when you look at the document itself, you will see that it lends itself for a more collaborative, and when I say collaborative, I mean within the institution. So you need a lot of stakeholders, a lot of role players. And my second suggestion in terms of actually having a work session works very well, because sometimes you get a very big discrepancy where a support person will tell you, no, this has not been done very well. And then somebody in management will be like, oh, but we're doing this very well, you know. So there's a discrepancy between the same activity, but two different people in two different positions see it completely different. So for that reason alone, I would like to have a work session. And then the person in support can tell the person in management, you know what, I see this because of this. And you give your reasons and you actually explain it out. Then it makes more sense, because otherwise it's very subjective, because somebody would say fully adequate for the same activity. Another person would be like, no, it's just partial. So for that reason alone, for that gray area, I definitely would suggest a work session of thoughts where everybody's sitting around a table and you're really deliberating it. You know, it really does make for very good conversation. If if not just sort of build relationships or break them in your in your central institution. So it was a fun and an eye-opening experience just to see how people saw how the institution was doing in a specific e-learning activity. So this is another one of my my limitations that I wrote there. I averaged out, and this is what happened. Because I didn't have that work session, I got the average, you know. So if somebody told me, because it's actually numbered, you know, it's numbered for each one of the for capability assessments. So it's a 4 for fully adequate, it's a 3 for largely, 2 for partially, and a 1 for. So I just got the average of that, and that's sort of what I used. And that is not always a reflection of what's really happening on the ground. But this is
It seems as if we have kind of lost connection to Antoinette at this stage. I saw that she was just back for a bit. We have also reached the end of this session. And as promised, the recording will be available a bit later today. And along with this, also the chat transcript in the chat box. So the questions asked and the comments given will also be visible there. I'm not entirely sure. I think we lost connection to Antoinettes. I think that we will then declare this session for ended. And I'm going to switch off the